Welcome to the Occult Rejects. On this episode, I got my boy JJ Vance co-hosting with me. Thank you very much, JJ, for coming on. And it was kind of like a short notice.
Sure, appreciate the invite.
Of course. So thank you very much for coming on. And finally got this man back on. I've been waiting since the last time he was on when he had told me that he was working on a new documentary. He always does good work. My opinion, I think the last documentary he did was amazing. I suggest everybody to check that out. It kind of blew my mind, and it was wild to find out that even some of my family members had actually had some of the same idea that he presented. So it was kind of interesting because even my family went to go watch it after I told them I thought it was so good, and they were like, "Oh yeah, your mom used to think that's what actually happened." I was like, "What the fuck?" So it was really wild for me to find out that my mom thought the same thing that Ryder Lee was showing in the movie. Just weird, you know. But yeah, we got Ryder Lee on with us today as the guest. Real quick, JJ, just let all the new people and the new listeners that don't know who you are, let them know where they can find your amazing work, please, sir.
JJ Vance, right there on the screen, host of Operation GCD to help folks out right there on the screen. Host a shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. In fact, going to be doing a live show tonight on The Process. What is The Process Church with Dana from Rotting Jewels? A continuation of numerous discussions we've had on The Process Church here on the Occult Rejects.
Yes.
Now, looking forward to the conversation. Appreciate the invite. Ryder, definitely enjoyed the documentary. Still processing a lot of our conversation last week from the ancient aliens and the UFO drone invasions. So a lot of good information there for folks to go check out on the conversation all three of us did last Wednesday on Operation GCD. And definitely looking forward to this one. I see a lot of process, speaking of Process Church, see a lot of Process Church connections within the whole intel, a mind-controlled killer circumstances you present in your film, and definitely looking forward to getting to some of those ideas.
Yeah, do you remember the little section that we had of Mark Devlin talking about the Process Church? Obviously, we couldn't go super deep into it in the documentary, but because it would...
No, it's great. Yeah, Mark Devlin's great, too. I'm very familiar with his work on Manson family. Sure, yeah. It's a great addition to your film, I thought. Him and Joe Atwell both were both surprising.
Yeah, I really liked what Mark Devlin brought to the table. His research is really incredible, and that's really awesome that you're doing things with Dana. I had her on my show as well. She's a really incredible researcher.
That's right.
Yeah. I highly suggest.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the crossover, a lot of the topics and personnel that you've identified in your film is just to me, I think it just speaks to the same kind of soup we're talking about here, where kind of the subject Dana and I are going to discuss tonight is just more of a general concept of what is the process. From a legal standpoint, from a reality standpoint, from an execution of their ideas standpoint. But yeah, they're certainly involved with a lot of characters like you all present as well in the film Sirhan.
Yes, wild, and how Sirhan is just basically being psychically driven to write the same thing. RFK must die over and over again, and then Jack within The Shining is essentially writing his own version of psychic driving, which is all work and no play, makes Jack a dull boy over and over and over again. And that's one of the connections that I found later on after I'd realized exactly what's going on within The Shining. And I was putting all these things together. And I was like, holy crap, this is exactly this is a real life example. And we show several real life examples of, what's being portrayed in The Shining, and then things that has happened in real life, like the dosing of LSD and the, Jack essentially being dosed with LSD. And we know that the CIA would do that all the time. They would even spray like LSD aerosol on entire groups of unsuspecting people. And that's really where we, got to the core of exactly what's going on within The Shining, and using all these real life examples of, and then you also have like things like with Sue Lyon as well within the movie Lolita, which is essentially about pedophilia. And then the exact same thing is happening to her in real life with James B. Harris, Kubrick's producer on the movie. He's doing the same thing to her. That is what she's portraying in the movie. And then with like A Clockwork Shining, whenever that came out, A Clockwork Orange, sorry. When A Clockwork Orange came out, it got banned in all these different countries because there was like, Clockwork Orange murders and gangs and things that were going on, and crime was rising really high. And they decided to ban the movie over there. And then like with, within The Shining with Shelley Duvall and the way that Kubrick is treating Shelley Duvall, it seems very reminiscent of what someone would do to another person if they're trying to, traumatize them and break down their mind and mind fracture them within the movie. And he's doing that to her in real life as it's sort of being portrayed in The Shining.
Yeah, I saw that, and when I was watching it, before I got to that part, I wondered if y'all were going to address what became of Shelley Duvall, and I thought that was a good way to summarize it there, the way you just did that section of the film, because yeah, clearly something happened to Shelley Duvall. She passed this past year. I saw y'all dedicated the film to her, her passing, or her life, that is. But yeah, she definitely, she was mentally affected there throughout the latter part of her life there after she did The Shining.
Yeah,
pretty
and
clear with her, her physical and drug abuse and physical deterioration.
Yeah, Kubrick is really a master filmmaker, and he likes to put things in there that are symbolically telling a story. And whenever one of the first things that Wendy sees after Jack is trying to kill her with an axe, and then she puts Danny out the window, and then she goes downstairs and she sees Halloran's body dead on the floor, which Halloran is the only person that is killed in this entire movie. And
sure,
he actually wasn't killed in Stephen King's novel, The Shining, but Kubrick put it in there that Jack kills Halloran in the movie. And then whenever Wendy turns around, she sees the gentleman that's standing there with the wine glass, and the gentleman says, "Great party, isn't it?" And he's got the split down his forehead.
Right.
That's, to me, some symbolizing the mind fracturing that Wendy is currently going through.
No, for sure. I think that was a great point too, because that was a very big beef between Kubrick and King, right? With these elements that Kubrick changed from the King narrative, and clearly Kubrick's changing these elements of the narrative for an intended purpose. And I think that's a good way to describe that scene for sure, because there's a lot of things I've seen The Shining before. It's probably my favorite Kubrick film. It's certainly the one I saw first. But there's a lot of things that I saw that probably as a teenager. I didn't really get into any other Kubrick films until recent years, probably 5 years ago or so. But I thought that was an interesting way to the psychic driving aspect of probably the line that sticks out, or the scene that sticks out the most in the movie to me, is the all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. And I never really considered that to be a psychic driving thing, but it makes a lot of sense in that context.
Yeah, our movie really brings together a lot of the holes that people have pointed out within the movie, why certain things don't make sense, why all these continuity errors are there, items disappearing and reappearing. There's even dialogue errors within The Shining that stick out like a sore thumb. And no one has really been able to explain why these things are there. And also, why these like random scenes of like when Wendy goes upstairs and she sees the guy that's dressed up in like a teddy bear costume that is, makes it look like that he's performing oral sex on the other gentleman that's in a suit that's on the bed. And a lot of those make sense when you realize that, what this movie is really about, and you can put two and two together and realize that exactly what's going on within this movie. And also Kubrick's like foreshadowing within the movie is like completely genius. It's genius filmmaking. In the very beginning of the movie, when the doctor comes to visit Danny, there's a teddy bear that Danny is laying on. There's teddy bear paintings and pictures throughout the movie. And then you got the teddy bear guy that's dressed up in a bear costume. The amount of times that baseball bats show up in the movie before Wendy even picks up the baseball bat is staggering. In the first 10 minutes of the movie, when the doctor is visiting Danny, there's a curtain on the side that has like a cartoon character holding a baseball bat. Whenever Jack goes to look at the maze, the model of the maze, which is one of the most interesting scenes of the entire movie, with Jack's looking at the model of the maze, and then the maze fades into the outside maze where Danny and Wendy is outside in the maze. It's unlike any other shot in the entire movie. But before he goes to look at the maze, there's a baseball bat that's laying on the couch downstairs. But then it automatically appears back upstairs in their apartment where Wendy and Danny are sitting, with the teddy bear in the background, another teddy bear symbolism, with a fire truck and the ladder of the fire truck sticking up, giving the appearance that the teddy bear has a heart on. And right beside that teddy bear is where the baseball bat is that Wendy picks up, and then goes downstairs and finds that Jack is, finds all of his work, that he's not really reading a novel. And she finds that he's just writing out the same thing over and over and over again. And
Looney Tunes.
Yeah, and then he comes in, and that's when he's triggered, and he decides to try and kill Wendy and go after Danny.
And even that's kind of foreshadowed, right? Because they tell the story of the previous caretaker who had into his family in the same means, right? That's where Jack learns it from, right?
Yeah, between Stuart Allman and the beginning of the movie is like the most incredible dialogue of the entire movie, because Allman pretty much sets up exactly what's going to happen throughout the entire movie. He tells Jack everything that essentially is going on, that it's not a physically demanding job, that it's more of a psychological job because of the isolation and everything that's going on up there, that, the winters are really bad. You're normally snowed in. You can't really get to town. And then you also have, what other programs and things do we know that uses isolation and sensory deprivation? I mean, there's an entire Kubrick counterintelligence CIA manual that uses sensory deprivation techniques and isolation techniques to get things out of prisoners. And
sure. That's called Kubrick, huh?
Yeah, it's Kubrick counterintelligence.
Yeah.
And
very strikingly similar to Kubrick, isn't it?
It is, and that we bring that up in the movie. Kubrick, like what's going on there? And and then Allman explains that what happened to the previous caretaker, that he suffered from some sort of what the police called cabin fever, and decided to kill his two kids and his family, and his wife. So I mean, and that's exactly what Jack ends up doing as well. JJ Freeze?
Yeah, I think he did. Yeah. Oh, well. Oh, there he is. He's back.
Oh, there he is.
Froze up. My gremlins are acting up on my Starlink today. Got a big storm coming in.
Oh, boy.
Someone activated the alien weather devices, apparently, and right back.
Well, that's wild. We can barely even see you anyway with that camouflage on, JJ.
Right?
He's got the camouflage all around him, too, on the outside. Look into that.
But yeah, our movie, A Clockwork Shinning, which is on Amazon Prime and Apple TV Plus, is a new look at the Shining material, and it's not something. It's not about the moon landing. Okay, Jay Widener is in the movie. Okay, he's the originator of the thinking that The Shining is Kubrick's confession of faking the moon landing, but this movie is not about the moon landing. We maybe mention the moon landing a couple of different times throughout the movie. It probably takes up like 2 minutes of almost 2 hours of the movie. So, before people think that, this is just a complete rehashing of old stuff and that it's nothing new, it isn't. It is 100% something new that I believe is actually going on with The Shining.
No, I think that's a great point, because, yeah, I mean, you obviously do touch on it there, but that's a great assessment. It was about 2 minutes of the 2 hours talking about the Apollo stuff. I did find a lot of the, and where y'all really touched base on it seemed like was the Wonderland Air Force Base Lookout Mountain Laboratories discussion, which was obviously relevant to mention there.
Yeah, that's a big integral part of the entire documentary, because it's interesting because there was a hotel that's set right there where Lookout Mountain Air Force Base became the Air Force Base, and the hotel was called Lookout Mountain Hotel, which looked, similar to Stanley Kubrick's Overlook Hotel within The Shining. And that hotel ended up burning to the ground in the early 1900s. And then Stephen King's sequel movie to The Shining, Dr. Sleep, the Overlook Hotel burns to the ground.
Oh.
So it's like this weird parallel between reality either mimicking art or art mimicking reality, which we find throughout all of Stanley Kubrick's movies. And then you also have, Catcher in the Rye as well. Like all that stuff with Catcher in the Rye is completely wild. I mean, when we first meet Wendy and Danny in the movie, Wendy is reading Catcher in the Rye, which is by an intelligence officer, J.D. Salinger. And this was a year before both assassinations, which involved Catcher in the Rye and was found on the scene. Mark David Chapman, John Hinckley Jr. This Catcher in the Rye was in this movie before those assassinations took place with John Lennon, and all the Beatles symbolism within The Shining as well is, they're walking almost identically to the Beatles' Abbey Road album cover. You have the beetle that's in the background of the Abbey Road cover, which was John Lennon's beetle. Stephen King put a beetle in the movie. It was supposed to be a red beetle. Stanley Kubrick changed it from a red to a yellow beetle. And then when Halloran's traveling up to the Overlook, you see a red beetle crushed underneath a 14-wheeler semi. Stephen King was supposed to, make the Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings movie where the Beatles were going to play all the hobbits. Stephen King actually got the idea to name his novel The Shining from a John Lennon song called Instant Karma, where he talks about we all shine on. There's so much Beatles things, Beatles connections between Stanley Kubrick, The Shining, and Stephen King as well. It's really incredible.
Yeah, I thought that was some interesting correlations I had not previously considered or identified. And, the Beatles are an interesting group because, back to the Process Church, they definitely erupt out of the Mayfair scene and literally out of the Process Church headquarters in the Mayfair. The Beatles form a band, and Paul McCartney was dating his girlfriend Asher. Her first cousin was a founding member of the Process, and I believe recently passed out there in Kanab, Utah, Diana Asher. And McCartney's girlfriend Asher, I can't think of her first name at the moment. I'm going to call her Linda, but I know that's not it. But yeah, her brother, the McCartney's girlfriend's brother, was allegedly a member of the Process and owner of that Indica art gallery, coffee and art gallery there in the Mayfair district, where the Beatles would hang out, and where John met Yoko. That's where Lennon met Yoko, was at that Indica gallery there. So it's very difficult. I mean, there's a lot more obvious symbolism within the Process and the Beatles. At the very same time, they're associating themselves with this. They'll make an album where they're all wearing a very Process-looking cloak, right, on the album cover. So, and then obviously there's the Crowley stuff when you come to Sgt. Pepper's, but nonetheless, it's a narrative that can't be separated between the two, the Process and the Beatles. And I had no idea there was those correlations in between the Beatles and the some of the naming there with the Kubrick films.
Yeah, and then Charles Manson said to be a part of the Process Church, and and also connection to the Beatles as well, like that gentleman just brought up in the chat. Manson being a musician, and I believe, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Manson claimed that the Beatles stole some of his songs or something like that. Am I correct in saying that? The Beatles were definitely part of that Laurel Canyon scene. So right there in Lookout Mountain Laboratories, Wonderland Air Force Base. I mean, the Beatles were hanging out right through there, along with the stuff you identify in the film with the Monkees and Jack Nicholson, and the psychedelic music scene that was going on there at the time. Jimi Hendrix would have been a third party there with Peter Tork and Jack Nicholson in that little trio of activity around that movie Head you all identify in the film. But yeah, I mean, the Beatles are very much part of that scene. Phil Spector, the producer of the
Wall of Sound. He produced the Beatles as well. He owned some of the rights to their music. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly a scene that they're often not immediately identified with, but they were certainly embedded in.
Yeah, in Chinatown with Roman Polanski, that
Sure.
he directed with Jack Nicholson, and then Roman Polanski was at a Jack Nicholson party, and then he raped a 13-year-old girl and then fled the country from prosecution. And then at that exact same time, Jack Nicholson also left to go to England to shoot The Shining.
Yep. Not coincidental, I'm sure. I mean, these are all part of the same network, it seems like, as far as the, these filmmakers and producers there, because you have Bob Evans involved in that Polanski-Nicholson cover-up of the rape business of Polanski. And, he's very much involved in with these same cult groups as well, along with, as y'all point out, Nicholson. But yeah, the Beatles stuff is very interesting to me because, they definitely seem to be very much part of this kind of occulted mind, almost like the way the Manchurian Candidate films served as some sort of, or even, as y'all point out, the book from J.D. Salinger there, I'm drawing a blank. What's the name of the book? Catcher in the Rye. There we go.
Yeah, it's so interesting because all the Beatles connections, and then it just happens to be that John Lennon is assassinated and murdered less than a year after The Shining comes out, where Wendy is reading the exact same book, and Mark David Chapman is reading the book on the scene after he's sitting on the sidewalk, and the police come, and he's actively reading the book Catcher in the Rye, and then he goes to court and stands up in court and says that if you want my defense, all you need to do is read Catcher in the Rye. And then a psychologist visits him in prison a couple of years after, and then he's still reading Catcher in the Rye. Then you have John Hinckley Jr., which was also involved in it was an attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan, but that was also found on the scene.
Sure.
It seems like we're in assassination season right now in the United States. It seems like we're bringing that full circle right back around.
For sure.
Well, I'm kind of waiting on that note. I'm kind of waiting for the Satanists to attack. That seems to be a going trend with a lot of these presidential assassination attempts, from Sirhan to even elements to the JFK situation with the same Satanist parties, through the Gerald Ford attempts in the 70s. Onto the Hinckleys and, whatnot. There all seems to be an underlying trend with Satanism. We haven't seen that yet in our latest assassination season, but I'm waiting for it.
Well, did you guys see this article about JFK from the Vanity Fair article? Where
I didn't.
He supposedly faked his assassination from the 2 months before his supposed real assassination in 1963, why JFK staged his own murder in a James Bond-inspired spy film 2 months before his assassination.
Well, that's wild.
Yeah, it's a whole Vanity Fair article here. It's and that's kind of what we surmise in our first documentary, JFK X, that me and Jay Widener did, that you can also find on Amazon Prime. So this was really wild to me that Vanity Fair came out with this, and it was Jackie Kennedy filmed a fake assassination of JFK 2 months before the supposed real assassination. So, I mean, I've shown this article, I've sent it to several people, and they don't even know what to make of it. They're like,
I'm in the same boat right now when you're presenting here. It's an odd one, right?
Yeah.
Yep. It's got, they talk about all of this, and that Jackie was a really big proponent of film. She wanted to be a filmmaker and a film director, and she studied French film, and all of the Secret Service agents that were involved with this, with the supposed real assassination that happened November 22nd, 1963, were also involved in this fake assassination that happened that was filmed 2 months prior. They were all there. Jackie called them and was like, pull up to the house and pretend that you heard gunshots go off.
Wow. I'm going to have to read that article.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty wild.
I'll drop it in the chat here too, and I'll also send it to you as well. But you also have Allman within the movie that looks almost identical to JFK, and JFK actually watched Kubrick's movie Spartacus at the White House.
Yeah, I saw that was an interesting part of the documentary y'all covered, because I think that's an under discussed aspect of politics in Hollywood is the Douglas clan altogether, and they're obviously deeply involved there in the film Spartacus as well.
Yeah, so JFK was definitely a fan of Stanley Kubrick's work. I mean, to watch, I mean, JFK was known to watch a lot of movies at the White House, but that was one of the first ones that he watched was Stanley Kubrick's Spartacus, and he supported it as well.
But that was considered a big left-wing effort at the time, right? That was very much part of the communist Red Scare in Hollywood, and they were often considered as the communist factions, right?
Yeah, JFK had, that's what a lot of people don't really remember, is that JFK was a Democrat. He wasn't a Republican, but a lot of the Republicans prop him up like he was somehow like a Republican. And
Sure.
A lot of the Republicans of the time did not like JFK. They were pretty much against him because he obviously wanted to desegregate the population and do a lot of left-leaning ideology things that the right did not want to do at that time, and that's what created, gave Kennedy a lot of enemies within the political spectrum.
There was a lot of left-right politics surrounding that production of that film, right? For relative to the impact on Kubrick, correct?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We have some clips of it in our movie. Like,
right.
It is very divisive film, just like a lot of Kubrick's early works were really divisive, and like Barry Lyndon, it did not go over very well. I mean, Barry Lyndon was an amazingly beautiful film. I mean, it was shot beautifully, of course, but it just did not go over well with the audience. It did not go over well with the critics. And it's a high possibility that Warner Brothers was kind of like, hey, let's do this horror novel by Stephen King, because they had already had a big success with a horror novel and big time film director with William Friedkin in The Exorcist, which was based on a book. There's so much information surrounding The Exorcist.
Surrounding that guy, right?
Oh. Yeah, I don't think that The Exorcist was. I don't think that was even a real story. I'm pretty sure people have done a lot of research into the Exorcist kid and that being a real story. And it turns out that all those people were fake. They were all fake people, that they never even existed. And but that's what the movie was based off of, was that novel. And it's highly possible that Warner Brothers was kind of like, oh, hey, do this book by this, big time author, Stephen King, because your movies before has just been, really big flops. Like, we can't take another flop. So let's do something that's been proven to work with, adapting a horror novel into a film.
Right. And they already had success with some of the King stuff right in the mid 70s with like, is it Carrie?
Yes, Carrie. I think Christine might have
been one
on.
of those Stephen King stories, right? They made in the 70s.
Yeah, and of course, but it as well. I think it might have came out in the 80s or so. I'm not up on a lot of the Stephen King films and their release dates, though. I am pretty good with movie release.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of King. That's one of the things that. I tried to watch The Shining when the King version, right? And I didn't think it was nearly as good.
Oh yeah, that was a bunch of garbage, and it was a mini series. I couldn't even watch it. I couldn't even finish it. It was just so bad. And we realized based off of that movie, that TV series that came out in the 90s, why Stephen King, changed up a lot of things within his version of The Shining, because they didn't make any sense. They did not transfer to film well. And that's probably a big reason why also Stanley Kubrick took out a lot of the paranormal aspects from King's book. He wanted to make this more of a psychological film instead of a horror movie with ghosts and paranormal activity. I mean, King has a freaking haunted bush. There's a freaking haunted bush in King's miniseries. Like,
it's
haunted bushes are not scary.
Version, right?
Well, within The Shining, it also talks about that's one of the things that Kubrick actually left in was Ullman talking about that is built on top of an Indian burial ground.
Sure. I guess,
and that's where a lot of the theories come from, that it's that the movie's about Native American genocide and the Holocaust and all that stuff as well.
Sure.
Because of Ullman commenting that the hotel was built on top of an Indian burial ground.
That is a Kingism, though, right? I think King puts that in a number of his books. Pet Cemetery. I think it's another aspect of Pet Cemetery, that the Pet Cemetery is on an Indian mound. Yeah,
and a lot of King's books also take place in Colorado too. And Pennsylvania, and they all involve a writer. Pretty much all of them have a writer in his novels.
Which was the employment of Jack, right? He was a budding writer trying to be, right?
Yeah, and that's a thing that we bring up in our movie as well, is like, because it's mentioned several times in the movie, like these people in Denver, like we show all the cuts of every time that these people in Denver are mentioned in this movie. And it's like 5 or 6 times in this conversation between Ullman and Jack, like, are people in Denver? Well, the people in Denver, the people in Denver highly recommended Jack, and no one has really asked, who are these people in Denver? Like,
right. What's they have contracts, right? They're like, they stress the contracts. Right, the Denver folks.
And then later on, when Jack is, going after Wendy, he's like, do you have any idea what a contract is? That I have a responsibility to my employers. It's almost like he knows exactly what's going on up there, that he knows that this is some kind of experiment that he needs to see through to the end, no matter what. And of course, Denver.
Point y'all made. I mean, it's nothing I had considered as many times as I've seen The Shining before, this whole Denver connection and these contracts. I kind of laughed at your all's montage of the Denver montage, because it's a heavy undertone in the plot line.
Yeah, these people in Denver. Well, your people in Denver might not have told you, but the previous caretaker murdered his entire family. Well, I understand why your people in Denver left that for you to tell me. It's over and over again. How many times they say
Jack kind of just chuckles it off, right? In the conversation with the JFK looking fellow, he kind of just, laughs at the Denver comments, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of well known that the CIA, like the Denver, Colorado, is like the hub of the CIA. Like it's like the second spot, other than Washington D.C., that has a heavy CIA presence, is in Denver. And people have talked about how Denver, well, in Colorado in general, is going to be this new, headquarters for the new world and all that. So, I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, the center of the United States is really where you would want to set up all your stuff, because, on any of the coast, if another country attacks, then they're going to get to you really quickly. But if you're positioned like almost directly in the middle, then there you go.
Sure.
And then you have all the stuff with the Denver International Airport and all the things that people have theorized that's going on there for a long time. Underground facilities underneath the Denver International Airport and all that, which DIA is really big, dude. Like, it is a big airport, and it seems like it's big for absolutely no reason. Like, you can just walk down corridors for like ever and not really even see anybody. It's so weird. But
it's so offset from the city. It is very strange. They could do anything underground out there for sure. It's the year of the tunnel, and there's not enough discussion about Colorado tunnels, but you got Cheyenne Mountain, you got all those Air Force bases. I mean, there's a lot of tunnels in Colorado for sure.
Well, there's a CIA document that came out, I think, in like 2011. It's called the Adam and Eve story. And it was a declassified document that talks about, whenever this giant cataclysm is going to come, that's going to completely wreck everything, one of the only places that's going to be safe from this cataclysm is going to be around the Rocky Mountains. So the only survivors of this giant flood that is supposedly going to hit the United States is going to be in Colorado.
That's
yeah,
wild.
the Timberline Lodge is where it was filmed. The exterior shots of The Shining was filmed in a Timberline Lodge in Oregon. The rest of it was shot in England on sets.
All right, I was vaguely familiar with the Lookout Mountain Hotel, but looking at, after y'all mentioned the documentary, looking at other pictures, that definitely seems like that was a very similar looking spot to what was modeled there in the film in The Shining.
Yeah, I think so. And and Kubrick was a really big researcher. He had like an entire team behind him that would go around to these different hotels and these different spots everywhere in the United States that would do research for him and come to the perfect spot to actually film his movie. But Kubrick hadn't been back to the United States, I don't believe, until he never came back after he made 2001: A Space Odyssey. So people should have known that he was not going to film his movie in the United States. But that might have been a contention also between him and Stephen King, because they might have been under the impression that he was going to film The Shining at the Stanley Hotel. But he didn't. He just sent a lot of his researchers there to figure out what he wanted to build the set to look like on the interior. And that's all that he was doing. So that might have been, what created this friction between Stephen King and Stanley Kubrick, was that they might have been under the impression that he was going to come to the United States and film The Shining at the Stanley Hotel. But Stephen King got his wish, and they filmed his miniseries that was complete garbage at the Stanley Hotel. I've been there a couple of times.
Sure, it's a nice place.
It is a really nice place. They got plaques on the walls they got the axe that was actually used in the filming of The Shining in like a case. They have like a modeled out room that looks like the room 237 of the bathroom.
Oh, nice.
The shower curtain, and then they also have the model of the apartment, Jack and Wendy's apartment, what it looked like as well. Then it leads into the 237 model of the bathroom.
So they really played into the culture then there, huh?
Yeah, but they don't support like Stanley Kubrick's movie. They're like, at the end of the tour, they were like, "Oh, here's a download code for the Shining miniseries by Stephen King." And I was like, no, nobody wants to watch that, bro. But
I didn't take the tour there. I had daylight burning, and the one thing I noticed on the way driving there were some excellent fishing spots right off the roadway. So
it's a beautiful Estes Park is a beautiful area to go up and visit. It would be
literally pull your car off and catch some trout right there in the in the rivers of the Rocky Mountains. 5 feet walk from your car.
Damn. Okay.
Yeah, it's really beautiful up there. It's kind of like it's a small mountain town. The downtown area is really beautiful. I wouldn't go up there in the winter though, dude. Like those mountains traveling up through there, dude. Mm-mm.
Sure.
Not
it's not that far from Denver, like
there.
miles wise, but yeah, and some snowy weather, it could feel like forever, I bet. Those winding roads.
There are some winders up there. You got to take that Sidewinder Snowcat up into those mountains, which then makes you think of like, how did they build this giant hotel up there? That had to take a lot of time to build that hotel. And there's also tunnels underneath the hotel as well.
Interesting.
At the Stanley Hotel, of course, there's tunnels that lead to the because the staff back in the day would actually stay on location. If they worked there, they would stay in like little cottages, like right off the side of the. If you've been there, you can see all those cottages, and where like the maids and the people that worked there would stay, and they had like a tunnel system that would go from the house that they would stay at on the property into the hotel.
Now, was that ever just a residence? Was that always a hotel? Was it a Stanley Steamer folks residence, or was that they just built it? The Stanley Steamer folks built that as a hotel.
I believe they built it as a hotel, but I could be wrong. Yeah. I don't really know my history that well.
Because it is out there. I mean, you make a good point. Logistically speaking, that would not have been an easy thing to build, especially that time.
Yeah, it would be really rough. And apparently, whenever Stephen King went to, because that's where he got the inspiration to actually write the book, was at the Stanley Hotel. Sure. And it was during like the off season, and a lot of the rooms were like closed down. There was very few people there. They had one bartender, and I believe that Lloyd the bartender is actually based off of a real bartender that was bartending at the Stanley Hotel.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I thought your all's hallucination explanation of Lloyd the bartender was more of a providing greater context to that character, because again, relying on the paranormal aspects of that character, that's one of the things I guess I didn't like. Watching The Shining originally, was some of the like this whole ghostly aspect of Lloyd the bartender and the whole ballroom experience. But it seems like that the hallucinogenic aspect that y'all present seems to make more sense to me.
Yeah, and you have real life explanations of that with Frank Olson. There's an entire Netflix documentary. It's about Frank Olson and what they did to him, and spiking his drink with LSD, and then he jumped off the out of the window of his hotel room and died. There's that's some of the things that happened to these Army personnel as well. That they would be unknowingly dosed with LSD. They were told that they were going to be a part of these experiments. They would get LSD aerosol. They were told to inhale LSD aerosol, and then they would be, a lot of those people ended up ending their lives as well because they couldn't handle it.
Was that Operation Midnight Climax activities?
That was one of them. This one was, I can't remember.
They were aerosol spraying the LSD into the Johns.
Something
in a whorehouse.
Something claw house or Ravens. No, Ravenscraig was at in Canada with Dr. Hugh and Cameron, which we also bring up in the documentary, that created this psychic driving aspect to implant thoughts and ideas into people's heads to make them do things that they otherwise normally wouldn't do after they had been traumatized, which that's 100% factual. There's documentation of that, and several of the people that went through that actually sued the Canadian government for those experiments that Ewan Cameron was doing at Ravenscraig in Canada. But there was another facility.
That was a great point you made there with Cameron, and I didn't know if I was going to ask you actually, because it immediately brought up to mind something about Clockwork Orange in Cameron, that he was intentionally putting some of these things into the Clockwork Orange for the intelligence services. I didn't know if that was something y'all had to leave on the cutting room floor, or getting more into that subject behind the Clockwork Orange and the intelligence services aspect of apparently putting these things into the storyline. Apparently, there was a biographer, I guess, that documented this about Anthony Burgess's life, where supposedly the intel agencies had insisted that he insert these aspects into the story, and basically write a science fiction story based on these details of these Dr. Ewan Cameron mind control MK Ultra experiments that you see in the Clockwork Orange, right? The horror and terror experiments where they keep old boy's eyes open, right?
Yeah, and they're putting the LSD eyedropper into his eyes and then make him watch all these movies to control his personality and control his behavior. Yeah, there's been a lot of military and intelligence involvement with movies going back a really long time. We talk about at the end of 2001 A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick thanked all of these big intelligence agencies, Air Force Intelligence, DARPA, Langley, Virginia, and then they were all cut out at the end of the movie. And we also show documents that the intelligence community has been involved with movies going back to, through FOIA requests. People have found that, they were involved in the Transformers movies. And it's kind of a known thing now, but back in 1968, when 2001 A Space Odyssey came out, no one knew that could even be a thing.
Absolutely. I mean, different time, right? Propaganda-wise, different time from what folks understood in the public, for sure. Yeah. Speaking of Cameron, I was actually just talking about Cameron last night on just randomly on a show, discussing the process in NXIVM, and how I have this theory that the Albany chapter of the process, which was confirmed by their own admission to never close, morphed into the NXIVM cult. And there was a neurologist that was working for NXIVM out of Albany, New York, same town that Dr. Cameron was out of for his, much of his career, that he was even running some of those experiments in Montreal, where he was commuting there from Albany, to and from multiple days at a time. But this next team neurologist lost his license for doing these exact same experiments, these horror and terror experiments, forcing subjects' eyes open to watch these dismembering of bodies, et cetera, et cetera. And he got busted by the state medical board for doing this to over 200 subjects. So these experiments seem to be still going on today in the same cities, involving doctors that that may not have known you and Cameron, but operating in the same locations as Cameron was operating with these same experiments. I just think it's a fascinating thing that these things may still be going on.
Well, a lot of the intelligence community was involved with these types of experiments. The Navy was involved with them.
Sure.
Navy intelligence had this experiment that was called the Ames Leaf Room, where you would go in and you would be dosed with LSD, and the walls would be like sort of covered in like leaves that would look like fall out there, and then they would essentially go crazy inside of this room. They would put these goggles on them that would like change their vision, and then they would end up at the emergency room, like basically in some form of psychosis. And entire hospital wings have been opened up for these experiments in Washington, D.C. During this time that the MK Ultra programs were going on. They basically just subleased a lot of these experiments to private contractors and like government contractors, almost exactly like what they do to this very day with any kind of advanced technology that they don't actually really want to be working with. They just sublease out that contract to a government contractor, because the government contractor is not under any kind of, you can't FOIA request a government contractor like Raytheon, like these Bigelow Aerospace and SRI International, like they're under no responsibility to provide any kind of documentation to anything that they do. So
plausible deniability.
That's right.
Yep.
So when you come knocking on the government's door for a FOIA request, they can deny that any of those, anything ever happened, because they technically didn't on their end.
Right. For sure. Yeah. Well, speaking of Lookout Mountain Labs and Wonderland Air Force Base, there's, same location, but different names to the same location. I don't know if this was originally like when I was watching your movie and you all showed the hotel, and I was looking through the hotel pictures, and I was like, well, and you just triggered your comment there on the Navy, in their activities, not just CIA or Air Force or whatnot. Navy's also involved in these things. That triggered two thoughts here. So now Jared Leto owns that facility, right? He but between it being Jared Leto's home and the Wonderland Air Force Base, it was one of these kind of reprogramming facilities, right?
Yeah, that's kind of under contention a little bit. And I mean, we do know that the Lookout Mountain Air Force Base was, used for making hundreds and hundreds of films. I mean, you can just Google Lookout Mountain Air Force Base, and on Laurel Canyon, you can see that there's thousands of movies and films that were made at Lookout Mountain that are still classified to this very day. But some of these actors had high-ranking top security clearance for the place. There was a fallout shelter there. Marilyn Monroe had top secret security clearance. James Stewart, Cary Grant, Ronald Reagan had top secret security clearance for the place, and no one knows what. I'm pretty sure. I think Sinatra. Yeah,
I believe Sinatra was there. Yeah,
and no one really knows exactly what was going on because all the footage is still classified now, and we know for a fact that that's where a lot of these atomic bomb tests took place there. They that it was done on all models. It wasn't actual footage of atomic bombs, like it was done on modeled sets, and that's a really big shocker to people that weren't aware of that to begin with. And who knows exactly what went on up there, but I would have to. Someone said the other day that Jared Leto doesn't own Lookout Mountain anymore, but I don't know if he was just a troll or.
I actually had someone mention that to me recently when I mentioned him owning it too, and I did look it up. And from my record, this is probably 3 months ago when that occurred. when I looked at it then, it looked like he still owned it. But this is Jared Leto here in this picture inside one of the rooms there on the property. This room I think was actually maintained from the original hotel through the Air Force Base on to the Leto ownership. And I think that's interesting that they maintain some of the space like that. It kind of reminded me of something you'd see out of The Shining in the Overlook Hotel, just this room in general and kind of the decor. But interestingly enough, this fella here on the couch, Leto in the blue shirt, this fella here on the couch talking to him is Gil Garcetti. At the time he was the mayor. Now he's currently the U.S. ambassador to India. But when you mentioned the Navy being involved in these activities, well, there's Naval Officer Gil Garcetti. So is the Navy still involved with activities there?
It still looks like he still owns it. I don't know what those people were talking about.
Sure.
Trolls.
But when you got this kind of naval officer hanging out there, right? No, I agree with you, Ryder. There seems to be a cover up of people not wanting to know that Leto still owns this. I don't know if it's the Jesus cult business that Leto engages himself in, but he's an interesting character because he sits at that epicenter of rock and roll star and A-list actor, right? Those are qualifications a lot of folks don't have on their scorecard, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's I think he won an Oscar, didn't he? He won an Oscar for Dallas Buyers Club with Matthew McConaughey as a supporting actor. For
sure. And I just think it's weird that when you mention the Navy intel stuff, like, you got a naval officer here who's just hanging out up there at maybe he's doing mayor stuff. Who knows? Maybe he's doing Navy intel stuff. God knows what they're up to, but
yeah, and the Navy being a part of a lot of this stuff, like Jim Morrison's dad was a Navy intelligence officer that was responsible for the Gulf of Tonkin false flag incident that led to the Vietnam War that killed thousands of people. Bob Marley's father was a British naval commander. Sharon Tate's dad was and then of course you got
Sharon Tate's dad. That's a good one. He was lieutenant colonel, right? Yeah. Army Intel.
Yeah, what's his name? Lived up in Laurel Canyon. I'm blanking on his name right now. But all these people, they have military connections. Like all the people that came up out of this Laurel Canyon scene all had family members or fathers that were somehow high-ranking military officers. And when you look at that, and then they're like, "Oh, holy crap! This is the reason why a lot of these people, they were just able to go wild and do whatever they wanted because they knew that they weren't going to get into any real trouble. They were just going to be immediately let out because their dad was these high-ranking military officers."
It's funny you mentioned that because you got guys like the epicenter of all those qualifications.
Frank Zappa, that's you. Frank Zappa, sorry.
Zappa,
I got so much stuff in my head that I need to remember, but Frank Zappa, as well. That's who I was thinking.
Zappa's a good one. But Papa John Phillips, his father, a career Marine Corps officer, he himself attended the Naval Academy. Not an easy place to get into before he dropped out and became the Laurel Canyon rock superstar. But according to the INS, he was an INS report. He was financing the activities of the Process Church there in circa 1967 there in Los Angeles, or I believe 68 in Los Angeles. So he's even connected to these things. And speaking of folks who get in trouble and don't get in trouble, he got busted for cocaine trafficking back in 1980, served 2 weeks at a minimum security prison in Pennsylvania for cocaine trafficking at the height of the cocaine epidemic, right? Like the crack epidemic situation. It's preposterous to think somebody would walk during that time, but sure enough, these people that do have these family connections and in this scene, they seem to walk.
Yeah, and then you have of course, connections with Jolly West as well, and all the activities that Jolly West was into. Jolly West was actually involved with this project called the Violence Project. You guys familiar with this? Where Jolly West was essentially would take people when they get out of prison and put electrodes in their brain to essentially incapacitate them if they go into an area where they're not supposed to go, and the police would come and pick them up. It was called. I
did not know about that, but it sounds like almost like a shot collar of sorts or something.
That's exactly what it was. It was I'm pretty sure it was like UCLA Violence Project, and the project was approved by Ronald Reagan, but then they kind of shut it down before it got up off of the ground. And Jolly West is also known to have spiked people's drinks with LSD. He was involved with the Kennedy assassination. Like, it's just wild. Like, all the different connections to all these people. Like, the rabbit hole goes so freaking deep, dude. Like, and what was their main goal of doing all this stuff back in the day? I mean, it's like desensitization, normalization. It's like exactly what Yuri Bezmenov was talking about, which we have a clip in our documentary of Yuri Bezmenov talking about it whenever, Kathy O'Brien talks about the MK Ultra being put into the school system to subvert the entire country and subvert the ideology of, the people that are now in the school system, because when they grow up 20 years later, they're going to be into the positions of power. And if we can control their minds and control their thoughts and their ideas now, we'll be able to infiltrate and basically do whatever we want later on, because we've already put this Marxist-Leninism ideology into all these people's heads in the school system in the 80s. So when these 80s kids grow up, they're going to be the ones that are running the country, and will effectively have been able to control them.
Seems pretty successful.
Absolutely. I think so. I mean, if you go back and listen to those Yuri Bezmenov discussions, like, they're literally spot on to exactly what's happening right now.
For sure, yeah.
He's not too far off.
And I think people, they'll listen to that and they'll kind of be like, oh, well, this sounds like exactly what's happening. But there's a deeper meaning, and there's a deeper layer of how it actually works, and the things and the techniques and the psychic driving and the traumatization that they can put people through to in order to influence their behavior surrounding any event. And when you look back through the United States and all these events that have happened, you see them as collective traumatizations, and then restrictions get tighter after those collective traumatizations. I mean, we're still living out the exact same kind of processes that happened after 9/11 and the Patriot Act. That stuff never went away.
Sure.
We still got to take our shoes off before we go on a plane. We still got to go through a freaking metal detector. So got to get our body scanned by these freaking X-ray machines. So, and those never went away. Still there.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's that's kind of the case always with security, elements into these kind of these communist ideals, right? It's never an extension of liberty ever involved in these communist ideals, and I think you identified a lot with the epicenter of the in your film, with the epicenter of the intelligence, and again with like folks like Sirhan, the epicenter of intelligence, cults, this mind control aspect to further these communist ideals, that because it's these cults that profess these communist ideals. Again, Sirhan was documented to be in attendance of numerous process church sex magic rituals, I believe is how it was phrased in the INS document.
Sirhan was?
Yeah, yep. According to the INS investigation there at the time, he was allegedly involved, and the process was spotted outside the Ambassador Hotel. I mean, they're that night there when Kennedy was shot. And not the only connection. There's not a lot of other connections there within the process to that immediate scene. But I'm just saying, like, there was members with the German Shepherds and the Robes spotted there. So it's not a great inference to even assume that they might have been there, because they were in fact seen there. So by numerous, at least that's the story, by numerous witnesses at the scene, right?
It's so interesting how the Sirhan, the ballistic evidence for the Sirhan assassination of RFK is missing from the National Archives, just like how the ballistic evidence from the JFK assassination is also missing from the National Archives.
And that was a great point there. We included Walter Bosley. He had some good points there on the Sirhan stuff. That is definitely eye-opening. Yeah, and I think a lot of the reason why some of that stuff is still under wraps is this intelligence control, the political stranglehold on folks. For example, the guy that picked up Robert Kennedy's body from the floor, and the ambassador who was there with him, a congressman out of New York, because at the time he was a senator from New York, right? RFK was. Congressman out of there, New York, Al Lowenstein, was with him on that trip. and was holding him, picking up his body there from the floor. Well, Lowenstein's son's deep up in the Clinton State Department. So these people are still in control today as far as politically speaking and intelligence speaking, as far as folks related to these scenes. I'm not saying Al Lowenstein had anything to do with RFK's death, although he did die a suspicious death himself, not all that long afterwards. So.
And RFK was running against LBJ, which after the supposed assassination of JFK, like LBJ famously wanted nothing to do with the Kennedy family.
Right.
And then RFK decides to run, and he was going to win. RFK was going to win.
Yeah.
Against LBJ.
Well, that's what the celebration was, right? At the Ambassador Hotel when Sirhan allegedly shot him, even though, like you said, the forensics evidence paints a different narrative. Pretty clear different narrative. But yeah, he was celebrating winning the California primary, which solidified his nomination for the 68 election.
That's right.
And y'all mentioned Son of Sam as well. Now that I think about it, y'all mentioned Son of Sam there in your film, and some of these mind control psyop assassin type situations, especially relative to the notions of LSD and whatnot. That's correct. Beatles were definitely part of the process. Which I thought was interesting because a character perpetrating the psyop narrative of the Son of Sam, I think that's what the publications were, at least in the newspapers, was a psyop in and of itself, part of the operation. But that fellow was none other than Chuck, New York Daily News reporter. Can't think of his name right now, but he was on the scene there as well in the Ambassador Hotel with RFK, reporting on that event as the story goes.
Yeah, then James Jesus Angleton, broke into Mary Pinchot Meyer's house and stole her diary, which Mary Pinchot Meyer was a mistress of JFK, and there's a lot of strange connections with James Jesus Angleton. There was a part of the documentary that kind of had to be cut, so you're getting a fresh something new here.
Oh boy.
James Jesus Angleton was Walter Bosley's mentor's mentor, and our documentary JFKX talks about Mary Pinchot Meyer and how James Jesus Angleton was involved with that. And after Mary Pinchot Meyer was killed on the DC towpath, she was supposedly shot to death. Right after that, James Jesus Angleton broke into Mary Pinchot Meyer's house or her apartment and stole her diary and pretty much raided her entire house, which is very similar to what happened to Stanley Kubrick after he died. There were men that showed up to Stanley Kubrick's house that were basically raiding his house and taking things out.
Oh, wow. Do you think the Mary Pinchot Meyer stuff was connected to the LSD type experiments because she was close with
supposedly
Leary?
Him and her and JFK were tripping LSD at the White House? Yeah,
right. Well, she was tight with Leary, so that kind of makes. I mean, it almost makes sense.
That might have been the calls for JFK to do. That's what's been theorized, is that it's kind of what gave JFK a change of heart there, and he started not wanting to be involved in these wars and not wanting to send funding to all these other countries and prop up these wars, not wanting to support the Vietnam War, not the Bay of Pigs incident in Cuba. JFK famously pulled out of that whole thing, which then in turn, pissed off the CIA.
Sure.
It's wild.
Isn't that what Kathy O'Brien says in your all's movie, that there's too much focus on the use of LSD because LSD, they found out in these MK Ultra style Monarch program style operations, they found out LSD was opening up neural pathways instead of closing them, and they wanted to close neural pathways in order to induce the trauma.
Yeah, there were several drugs that were used within the MK Ultra programs. We actually show a list of them all in our documentary, and there's I think over 100 of them. Everything from freaking nicotine to caffeine to sugar to antipsychotics, antidepressants, Adderall, Ritalin, meth, any stimulant, any downer, and I think that LSD could be used in a really intense way. Just like I was mentioning the Army personnel earlier, it was a drug called BZ, which was 100 times more powerful than LSD. And when that's applied and it opens up those neuron pathways, then you can effectively implant things that may or may not be real into the subconscious of the patient more easily, because the mind is completely opened. The doorway is open, so therefore you can put whatever you want inside of the heads of those people. And that's what Ewan Cameron was essentially doing in Canada. Was he was traumatizing the patients, he was then drugging them, and then he was putting in a looped, repeated audio message to implant this thought and this idea into their head. And really nobody knows exactly what was on those looped audio recorded messages, but it could literally be anything. But what would be the more advanced version of doing that? You can do it with a looped audio message. Well, couldn't you do it with a TV? Can you wheel a freaking TV in there and do the same thing and also give them audio and visual? Then what's the next step after that? The next step after that would be virtual reality headset goggles. So you traumatize the patient, you drug them, and then you put these goggles over their head that artificially simulates an entire reality, and the person is not going to know if this is real or this is fake.
Sure. Makes sense to me, the immersive experience of the VR goggles. Sure.
I mean, some people think that the VR goggles are so real they don't even need to be drugged. So imagine if you're on some sort of hallucinogenic drug and you put on these freaking goggles.
Sure, no, it's a good point. And I think the designer drug aspect of Kathy O'Brien's statements, I thought were I took note of that the most, because I do think it's a designer drug. And I think things like GHB, the stuff that Diddy allegedly was putting in all those bottles of baby oil, I think stuff like GHB has been developed for these purposes of some mind control, implanting of ideas due to the hypnotic state that folks are under with that drug.
Yeah, GHB was used, and Sidney Gottlieb had a brother that was a plant biologist, so it stands to reason that his brother was more than likely responsible for a lot of the manufacturing of these CIA designer drugs, like Kathy was talking about in the movie. Let's just try and whip up whatever we can to see what kind of effects these are going to have on these victims. That's where a lot of these drugs actually came from to begin with, before they were, given to the public. They came from these experiments by the CIA.
Yeah, LSD was an accident, right?
There's so much stuff to. I mean, one of the first
Supposedly
distributors.
He was aiming to do something else, though, right? He was aiming to do one thing and kind of messed it up, I guess, is the storyline. Because he was riding his home on his bike before he realized. Maybe you have some more details on that, Ryder.
Well, there's a lot of different theories of exactly where the LSD stuff came from. Some people say that it came from Southern California and Laguna Beach area. Others say that it came from overseas, or some idea like that. But the first manufacturer of LSD in the United States, which was basically signed by the CIA and by the government to distribute LSD, which was Eli Lilly and Company. They also were the first manufacturers of Prozac as well. So
they beat out Sandoz Laboratories with the LSD, huh? Was the Eli Lilly?
Yes, from my understanding and from my research, they were the first manufacturers of LSD. Well, the first people that had a contract with the government to manufacture LSD for the government. They may not have been the first manufacturer of it ever, but they were the first that had a government contract to manufacture it for them.
That makes sense. There was a comment about Albert Hoffman. That was the guy I was thinking of there, that apparently, as the legend goes, he accidentally synthesized LSD, I believe is how the tale goes.
And where was that at? Was that in California or
Hoffman? I think I thought he was maybe a British fella. Could be wrong. Yeah, he was Swiss. Yeah, he was
Swiss.
He's allegedly the first to synthesize it, whatever that means. That's what I'm saying. So like even the original founder of LSD, like this is not a natural element. This is a designer drug. It seems like it's always seemed like that to me. The way they phrased that specifically, the synthesizing the drug.
Yeah, that makes sense. And with them tinkering with all these drugs and like all these freaking elixirs and stuff. I mean, for sure they're using mixtures of psilocybin and LSD, and they're trying to make the LSD even stronger. They're trying to make psilocybin even stronger, and
right.
They're just using a concoction. They're just throwing a concoction together and see what's going to happen. There's a really good
pot's even stronger now today, right? They've even engineered pot to a degree that
I think so for sure.
It's kind of crazy.
Oh
yeah,
definitely. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on, like some of the things that are on your documentary that you haven't mentioned yet, Ryder?
Yeah, there's several things that we can really get into. I have a whole slide thing here of all the continuity errors. I don't know if I want to show it or not. People have been complaining that I just keep showing the same thing over and over again. So,
well, they may not have seen it here yet.
Can't make everybody happy, right? Everyone's going to complain about something, I feel like.
Oh,
I know. Okay, well, we can run through it really quickly, just to give people an idea of exactly what's going on. Let me.
We still got your trailer too. We never put up.
Oh yeah, let's watch it. Let's drop the trailer.
All right, here we go. Let me set it up there.
Behind me were the headquarters for the World War II Office of Strategic Service. It was here that the first halting steps toward mind control began.
So 10 years before Stanley Kubrick made The Shining, he made another film. It was a film about mind control called The Clockwork Orange.
The Shining is one movie that has really been put through the ringer, and one thing that people really don't notice, that doesn't really make a lot of sense.
All during the shoot, Kubrick is rewriting the movie.
What we see here is Stanley Kubrick trying to encode a secret meaning into The Shining that he doesn't want anyone to know about.
Kubrick has several references to Freemasonry in his films.
There's a lady that walks past that has a bloody handprint on her ass.
The Shining is Kubrick's 11th film, and there's 11s all through the film. 11 is a special number in occult theology.
The Shining has been regarded as one of the greatest horror films ever made. But is it really a horror film?
The Shining also is loaded with sexual innuendo.
The family is isolated up at the Overlook, which is a perfect opportunity for some sort of CIA experimentation to go down up there.
Using MK-Ultra methods, psychiatrically control assassins. Literally assassins.
Experimental drugs, including LSD, were administered to human guinea pigs. The patients were never told that their treatment was part of a CIA experiment.
And there is this story which involves him spiking the drinks of one of his deputies, this guy Frank Olson, and he jumped out of a window to his death.
It's a demonic possession, so it makes someone feel like they don't have any control over this etherical entity outside themselves, when really it's the people who are imposing the trauma that need to be held accountable for the actions.
Mrs. Thomas.
We know what happened in the apartment that they had.
There are many clues that point to the fact that this theory of what The Shining is really about is the correct theory.
We think that we're watching a horror movie where ghosts are kind of forcing a man to go off and kill his family. But what are we really watching here?
Wendy, I'm home.
Boom, baby.
Nice, man.
It's a gripping trailer for sure.
Hell
I like
yeah.
the audio there at the end.
Thank you. Yeah, we can go through these slides real quickly. I'll just kind of jump through them real quick. Let's see here. So within the trailer, I already showed you this in the trailer. Whenever Jack stands up in the ballroom for the gold room the second time, there's a lady that walks past. It looks like she has a handprint on her ass. She's actually the one that bumps into Grady here that's carrying the tray, which then spills the alcohol on Jack, which looks very identical to later on with Tom Hanks in the movie Castaway. The same type of handprint is on the ball, pretty much
Wilson.
identical. Yep. Well, good old Wilson and Castaway and Tom Hanks. You can get in all the freaking Tom Hanks stuff and all.
Right.
But there's light switches that disappear within The Shining whenever Halloran is giving a tour to Wendy and Danny throughout The Shining. Then whenever Wendy is dragging Jack's body back into the storage room, there's a light switch that is not there. It disappears. And then we have ones that are appearing. Whenever Jack is going into the office of Ullman, there's not a light switch underneath the picture there, but later whenever he's going back in to destroy the radio to prevent Wendy and Danny from leaving, there appears a light switch, which is crazy. This one is whenever we see the first establishing shot of the hotel, there appears to not be a maze in the background, but later on we obviously do know that there's a maze, and people said, well, that's because there's not a maze at Timberline Lodge, and the exterior shots were shot at Timberline Lodge, which they are correct. There's also not a maze at the Stanley Hotel as well, though they have put in a maze later on that's actually in the front of the hotel, but it's still a continuity error, because that's what a continuity error is things that does not tell a congruent story, where things change and mess up. So Kubrick should have superimposed a freaking maze in behind the hotel here. Okay,
that's what I was gonna say. He could have used a miniature, right? He used miniatures in his films.
Yeah, he could have superimposed the maze back there, but he didn't. This one's interesting because the tie, this is one people have pointed out a lot before. It's not even in our movie, but I think that it's really interesting. His tie looks like the overhead shot of the maze, which is kind of foreshadowing for Jack. This is one that people have pointed out a lot throughout the movie. The sticker disappears on Danny's door. It's of Dopey the dwarf from the Seven Dwarfs. And then whenever the doctor comes to visit Danny, the sticker is then disappearing on this second quarter panel of this image down here. This one's a dialogue error between Wendy and Jack. Wendy tells the doctor that 5 months ago is when Jack injured Danny's arm, and that was whenever Danny starts talking with Tony, which Tony is the entity that's supposedly in Danny's throat that he talks to through his finger. And Jack has been sober now for 5 months. Later on, Jack tells Lloyd the bartender that the event happened 3 years ago. This one's interesting. This is Kool-Aid on top of the fridge in their apartment, which Kool-Aid also shows up later on beside the Tang, which could be in relation to the Jim Jones incident that happened during the filming of The Shining. Just 2 years prior to the Shining's release was when the Jim Jones incident happened, and you can connect the freaking MK Ultra stuff directly to Jim Jones. This is a clear plastic tarp in the background of the set when Danny's driving his tricycle through the hotel. There's a clear plastic set tarp in the background. This one is one that people have pointed out several times, which is the chair disappearing behind Jack. In one shot of Jack, there's a chair and a coffee table that's right behind him. It cuts to Wendy, cuts back to Jack. The chair and coffee table is gone, and then it cuts to Wendy again, and then back to Jack. This is all in the same scene. Then the chair and coffee table then reappears. This is one of the only reappearing continuity errors through the entire movie. This one's interesting because this is when Stuart Allman is talking to Jack, and Jack mistakenly says that 5 months of peace is just what I want, just what I need, when really it would be 7 months of peace that Jack would need. That's the amount of time that they're going to be up at the hotel, because the hotel is closed for 5 months out of the year and open for 7. I mean, open for 5 months out of the year and closed for 7. So Jack would really be up there and his family would really be up there for 7 months, but he says 5 months. This one is a sexual innuendo with Jack and Ullman. Whenever Jack first comes to meet Ullman and do his interview for the job, there's a paper tray on the desk. Jay Weidner has pointed this out, several times, that the paper tray on the desk appears that it's giving Ullman a hard-on. Another one is the teddy bear that I was mentioning earlier in the background here, which the fire truck ladder is sticking up, giving the appearance that the teddy bear has a hard-on. This is the baseball bat that I was also mentioning earlier with the curtain in the background. When the doctor comes to visit Wendy, there's a cartoon character up here holding a baseball bat. And then later when Jack is going to look at the model of the maze, there's the baseball bat right there on the couch downstairs in the lobby. And then later on, when he picks up the baseball bat that's next to the teddy bear with the fire truck sticking up, the fire truck ladder sticking up, given the appearance that the teddy bear has a hard on, that's where she picks up the baseball bat to later strike Jack in the head with. This one's interesting. This one is one that whenever Danny first sees room 237, there's a door that's closed to the right of him where this arrow is pointing in this top right-hand panel. And then it cuts to room 237. You see the door, and then back to Danny as he's on his tricycle, and the door is then opened. This one is one that people have pointed out several times, which is the carpet changing patterns when Danny stands up in the hallway. It starts out as an open-facing hexagonal carpet pattern, and then it changes to a closed-facing hexagonal carpet pattern, which people have said that Danny just switched. The Kubrick turned him around on the carpet, which is probably true, but it's still a continuity. Or everything is set up exact same way that it was. All the cars are the exact same, sitting the exact same position. But the carpet, he just turned Danny around in the shot or moved him over one hexagonal carpet pattern over to create the closed-facing hexagonal carpet pattern. This one's a foreshadowing by Kubrick that I was mentioning earlier, where Danny's laying down on a teddy bear. Then you also have the teddy bear with that we just showed with the fire truck ladder sticking up, and then you have the teddy bear with the gentleman is dressed up in a teddy bear costume, supposedly performing oral sex on this gentleman on a bed. This is the Tang that the astronauts are said to have used in the Apollo program. That was like the big astronaut drink was Tang. It's right beside the Kool-Aid here. You also have the Native American symbolism back here. The Apollo 11, which was what Jay Weidner, his first two films of Kubrick's Odyssey 1 and 2, basically talk about the shining being, the confession of Stanley Kubrick from faking the moon landing. Danny stands up in the Apollo 11 shirt. The carpet on the floor looks like the Apollo 11 launch pad. He goes in the room 237. During that time, people thought that room 237 was how far the moon was away from Earth. This is the Shining Toy Story reference.
Oh, wow.
In Toy Story, the carpet is the same as the shining carpet. Even the wallpaper is the shining carpet. There's also a shining scene in, what's that movie by, it was basically about the AI, the AI robot where they're playing a game. It was directed by Steven Spielberg. Ready Player One. There's a whole shining scene in Ready Player One as well. I don't have a slide for that, and then the TV is not being seen to be plugged into anything, which could be Stephen King symbolically, telling people that the moon landing was indeed faked, because if it was fake, then that would mean that it was pre-recorded footage. So it's almost like Wendy and Danny here are like just watching nothing on the TV. So also kind of relates to MK Ultra mind control, because that would be one of the largest mind control experiments that was ever done if the moon landing the footage was indeed faked. This one's a dialogue error between Ullman and Ullman telling Jack that the previous caretaker's name was Charles Grady, but later on when Jack meets Grady, he refers to himself as Delbert Grady. There's two different Gradys. This one's a really wild one, which is that you guys see what's wrong with this isn't from the same scene. Okay, so Halloran is giving Wendy and Danny a tour of the hotel kitchen area where she's going to be making food and providing food for Danny and Jack. This is a part of the same scene. So when Halloran is opening this door right here, this is the door handle is on the right-hand side, right? So the next scene is them inside of the freezer room here, and this is them exiting the freezer room. So not only does the door handle change sides, when they exit, it's now on the left side, and the background is completely different. The top photo looks like it's a background of like the kitchen area where they cook food, and there's like this table here beside the door that looks like it has plates and cups and stuff on it. There's a blackboard in behind them, but whenever they exit the freezer room, there's these twin double doors here. There's a fire alarm on the wall here. It looks like that there's a switchboard or maybe some kind of light switches here, like the mainframe light switch, and this hazardous discard pile, and there's windows back here and looks like a mirror. It's a completely different set.
Sure.
And that is a huge continuity error. Like, he had two different sets going on whenever they walked in to the freezer room, and they walk out and it's a completely different side. And now people have tried to say, well, he just switched the side that he was filming it from, but that doesn't make any sense. Even if you were to switch the side where you were shooting to give a different perspective, that doesn't change the side that the handle of the freezer is
sure.
on.
Well, and the window next to the handle in one shot, and there's no window in the other shot. So yeah, it's clearly a different scene.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the Beatles Abbey Road symbolism that we were talking about and mentioning earlier. That is almost identical to the Beatles Abbey Road album artwork with the Beatle, John Lennon's Beatle in the background. And there's more Beatles symbolism. Stephen King's had a red beetle in his novel. Kubrick turned it into a yellow beetle. And then when Halloran's on the way up to the hotel, there's a red beetle crushed underneath the 18-wheeler. Stephen King got the idea for naming The Shining after the John Lennon song Instant Karma. Wendy is reading the book by an intelligence officer named J.D. Salinger called Catcher in the Rye. Less than a year after this movie came out, John Lennon was then assassinated. This one is strange because it's a lampshade. It's a lamp that whenever Jack is busted down the first door into the apartment and Wendy and Danny is running into the bathroom, there's a lamp on the table there that's crooked, and then when Jack walks in, it's straight. This one is a really interesting one because this one is where the famous scene of Jack breaking down the quarter panel of the door to get into the bathroom to, essentially murder Wendy. He is only seen breaking down the right side quarter panel of the door and sticking his head through and saying, "Here's Johnny." But then whenever he hears Halloran's snowmobile pull up to the scene and the scene cuts and he turns around, both sides of the quarter panel of the door have been smashed out. This is a poster in the background whenever the first time Danny sees anything strange in the hotels, when the two twins appear in the games room, he's throwing darts at the dartboard, he turns around and there's the twins, and there's a poster in the background that says Monarch. This is another one that people have already pointed out several times, which is at the end of the movie when the shot fades from a faraway shot to a close-up shot of Jack. It's seen that Jack appears to have a tiny little Hitler mustache in there. In the background of the gold room, the first time that they walk in and Ullman is giving them a tour along with Bill Watson here in the back, you can see a Nazi swastika imprinted into the background of the gold room. And that is the end of the presentation. And Bill Watson within the movie is a super strange character. He doesn't really seem to do much at all. He's just kind of there. He's like an observer. And I relate that a lot to Sidney Gottlieb within they look almost identical as well to Sidney Gottlieb, but there's very few photos of Sidney Gottlieb out there. So it was, kind of difficult to find any photos of them. There's only like 1 or 2 or 3 out there that you can find, and I already had them in the documentary. But it seems like Bill Watson is really the runner of this experiment and this thing that's going down up at the Overlook. And there's a whole ending to The Shining that was completely cut out of the movie that Kubrick filmed that didn't make it into the actual movie, that really explains this entire thing and confirms our theory of exactly what's going on up at the Overlook and what Stanley Kubrick was trying to say within the movie The Shining.
Yeah, for sure. If you didn't mention it, I was definitely going to mention that you all definitely wrapped it up great, and I was totally unaware of the alternate ending. So yeah, that was definitely a good way to end the documentary, I thought.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So basically at the end of this original ending that Kubrick cut out, like Ullman comes into the hospital and is like, "Hey, what's going on here? What's happening?" And they pretty much confirmed that it was a giant experiment that was ran up there. Then he throws Danny a tennis ball that Jack was throwing against the wall, which was also the exact same tennis ball that inexplicably rolled toward Danny before he went into room 237. How did he know about that tennis ball?
For sure.
How did he know that tennis ball was even there, and how did he know to throw it to Danny?
Weird. Tell you the truth.
All of that was great stuff. Yeah, for sure.
I never noticed so much of that incontinuity that you were talking about before in the movie. Till you mentioned it. I mean, I've seen it multiple times too.
Yeah, that's pretty much all of the ones that I know about, and I'm sure that there's others that some people might be able to find or come up with, but those are like the main ones, and a lot of them people hadn't ever really noticed, and that comes from just watching this movie over and over and over again. So
sure. With Kubrick being such attention to nut about attention to details, as y'all point out in the film with his recreation of the B-52 bombers and whatnot, in his previous films that alerted the intel services, what do you think his purpose was for all these continuity errors?
I think the purpose is to slowly drive the viewer into some form of also questioning their reality, and go down this delusional aspect, just as Jack is also going down this rabbit hole of like delusion and psychosis and paranoia. I think that Kubrick is also wanting the audience to take this journey just as Jack is also, and it's subliminal, right? It's not something that's, I mean, some of them are really in your face that you can notice on a first viewing, but some of the other ones are really subtle, and it's affecting your subconscious to give you this eerie feeling like something is not right about this movie. And people can't really put their thumb on what's not right about it. Why am I getting this creepy feeling? Why is it eerie? Is it just the visual aspects? Is it just the soundtrack and the music? I mean, I think that definitely adds to it. But the continuity errors and the dialogue errors within the movie is affecting the subconscious of the viewer, even if they don't notice it. It's still giving them this eerie, strange feeling that they can't quite put their finger on. And this is what keeps people coming back to this movie over and over again and rewatching it over and over again. And that is what is happening with Jack. He's also starting to go into like these delusional aspects. And it makes sense to me that would be the reason why Kubrick is doing that. He's putting it in there. It's another symbolic type of metaphor to make the viewer and the audience that's watching the movie to slowly start to question their reality, just as Jack is starting to question his reality and go down this rabbit hole of delusions within the movie.
No, that's a great explanation, Ryder. It makes a lot of sense. I've been Kubrick mindfucked from watching The Shining.
That's funny.
And it does. I mean, there's always been this creepy aspect of the movie that people just can't put their finger on. They're like, "Oh, what is going on here? What's happening? Why am I feeling really creepy about this entire thing?" And I think that's exactly what's going on. And obviously, the soundtrack definitely helps. The soundtrack is very creepy with the creepy tones and the music that is used, and the visuals as well, like the quick cuts from Danny and the blood in the elevator and the twins and all that. It's very symbolic.
Yeah.
I think those
very uniquely shot film.
Yeah, deeply layered film, I think, for sure. Well, thank you, Ryder. I mean, we're at an hour and a half now. I figure maybe we could wrap it up here, and I'm sure you don't want to spill all the beans so people go check out the movie. You know what I'm saying? So remind everybody where they can please go find this if they want to watch it, please.
You can find it on Amazon Prime, Clockwork Shinning. You can just type it in the Google or any search engine, and you can also find it that way. And if you don't have Amazon Prime in your country, you can also find it on Apple TV Plus as well. And we will soon be making it to where anybody anywhere in the world can also watch it as well, hopefully by the end of this month, right in time for Christmas. So if you're in the Christmas spirit and you're missing that spooky season, baby, go watch our documentary, A Clockwork Shining, on Amazon Prime and get all your spooky feels for Christmas. And thanks for having me on, guys. And if people are also interested in finding out more of my work, I also have a show on YouTube, which is being simulcast from the Occult Rejects on my YouTube channel as well. YouTube at Raised by Giants, and on any and all podcast platforms. And you can follow me on X, Twitter at Raised by Giants 8, or Instagram at Raised by Giants Pod. Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. I hope everyone has amazing holidays that are coming up here very soon.
Thank you very much, and I always love having you on, man. It's always a great talk. I love your work. Everybody, please go check out his. They put his link tree in there, so I'm sure from there, as of now, you could probably find a way to his documentaries. I'll throw in some links if I have to after the fact. JJ, please let everybody know real quick before we wrap this up where they can find your work as well. And thank you very much for jumping on, man. Please.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate the invite, Ryder. Appreciate your time. Great movie. Love the new ideas and thoughts that I got from watching it, and definitely enjoyed the guests you have on there. I'm a big fan of Joe Atwell's work. Mark Devlin and I used to communicate quite frequently years ago when he mentioned he was on a tour of Laurel Canyon in 2017. I was like, oh, that's right. I used to talk about Laurel Canyon and some of these kind of weird scenes inside the canyon ideas with Mark Devlin back around 2016, 2017. Because he brought me up to speed on the Africa Boombada and the kind of the hip hop, kind of nature that weird scenes inside the canyon, into the hip hop community. Because he was a DJ and I was focusing on the time on my Laurel Canyon series. So definitely crossed paths with Mark. He has some great ideas too. So there's definitely and Walter Bosley. He's brought some interesting things to my perspective. I caught his show last week on the Process Church with Todd Wood and Dana from Rotting Jewels. There was a good show on some of those topics, but he's always bringing some new stuff to the table. It seems like relative to the conspiracy culture. So yeah, quite a lineup of folks in your movie. I was quite impressed. But yeah, definitely recommend folks check that out, and appreciate both your gents' times.
Oh yeah, thank you very much, and thank you everybody in the chat. That's what's up. I saw a lot of people over there from Ryder's channel. And JJ's commenting too, because I can see it in StreamYard. I appreciate that. I'm glad everybody enjoyed it, and thank you for everybody that jumped in on my channel from the live section. That's what's up. I saw a lot of familiar faces, and that's why I do this. I'm glad you all enjoyed it, and until the next one, everybody be well. Later.